The year has finally come to an end, and it's time to reflect on everything that I've written this year and everything that I've done and related to my writing. If you're new here, my name is Stephanie, and I am writing my very first book called Project Lily. I'm recording my journey and taking you along with me as I attempt this monumental task of writing a book. And where I am in the process is I just finished draft 3 2 days ago. I'm so excited. That vlog is coming up in a few weeks, so you will get to see me finish draft 2, but it is done as of 2 days ago. I'm so excited. My goal was to finish it by the end of the year, and I did. This year has been quite an eventful year, not only in terms of writing, but personally. I moved cities, which impacted my writing quite significantly, so I will be mentioning that throughout this video, but I do want to focus on what I did in writing. And first, I'm going to talk about the fact that I wrote 3 entire drafts of my book this year. I started draft 1 over a year ago, so that was last year, but it was November of last year. And I only wrote, I'm not really sure, I should have checked, but 10 to 20,000 words last year. And the rest of draft 1 was completed this year. I spent about the first 5 to 6 months of this year working on draft 1. I did have a full-time job at that time. And yeah, it was the very first draft, my first attempt at writing and first attempt at writing this book in particular. And it was definitely something very challenging, but I got through it and I was really happy to have done that. And then it came time to work on draft 2 for this book. So what happened was I read draft 1. I thought it was absolutely terrible. I hated it. And I decided to throw it away. So all that work that took me 6 months to do in pretty much the first half of this year was in the trash can. I still kept threads of the story, like who the characters were, what they wanted, a few parts of the plot and world, but I basically redid the entire story. I replotted it, I re-outlined it, and basically came up with a brand new book before writing draft 2. And draft 2 was a rewrite. I wrote it entirely from scratch. I recycled very little from draft 1. I think it was maybe 2 scenes. It was pretty much written off the top of my head on a blank piece of paper. And draft 2 took me 2 months to do. It was a much shorter time frame simply because I was unemployed at that point and I had nothing else to do other than write my book. But I was really glad that I had the time to do it, and it kind of, I feel like this unemployed part of my life has really jump-started my writing, and I'm very lucky for that. And then when I read draft 2 and it was done, I also wasn't super happy with it. I see like a trending pattern here. So I think I spent about a month in between drafts 2 and 3, and I replotted draft 2, re-outlined draft 2 in preparation for draft 3. And I think this was kind of a turning point for my novel because I felt like going into draft 3, I finally had a cohesive story that made sense. I didn't have tons of holes, and it made going into draft 3 a lot easier. I also think between drafts 1 and 2 and 3, there was a huge learning curve for me in terms of writing and storytelling and preparation and knowing how much preparation I need going into drafts. And that's still evolving. I learned a lot doing draft 3 as well. My approach to these drafts and writing has definitely changed over time. So once I replotted, re-outlined, and was ready to get into draft 3, I did start draft 3. And as I said, I finished it 2 days ago, really exciting. And draft 3 took me a little under 3 months to do. This one took a little bit longer than draft 2, primarily because I approached it differently than the previous drafts. In the previous drafts, I was writing from scratch. I started on a blank piece of paper and wrote from memory/outline. And in draft 3, I did a mix of writing from scratch and recycling previous scenes and chapters from draft 2. And so I would say the split was about 50-50, 50% new scenes, 50% recycled scenes. So as I was moving through the draft, every time there was a recycled scene, those tended to take a little bit longer because I was finagling them, improving them, and editing them in the same time, kind of reorganizing them and making them fit into this new version of my story. And then the newer scenes, it was a lot easier for me to write a scene from scratch because it was just in my head and I needed to get it on paper. There wasn't a thought about how to change it or make it work in a new story like I was with the recycled scenes. It took a little bit longer because I was doing this editing. Also, I took the approach with this draft that when I was finished with one chapter, I would go back and edit the chapter. I really like doing this because it allowed me to see a lot of inconsistencies and repetition that were in my chapters when I would like take breaks or take a day or two off. Sometimes I would just forget what I had written, 2 paragraphs before because I hadn't seen it in 2 days, and then I would end up repeating things. And this kind of cleared all that up. It also gave me an overall sense of how does the chapter sound as a whole, because when you're writing it for an entire day, you almost tend to forget what it was like in the beginning. And so this was just that really fresh perspective of what would it look like to actually read this chapter through. It was a really helpful approach, but it did take longer, and that's why this draft took almost 3 months instead of 2. But overall, I'm really happy with it. I'm glad I finished by the end of the year. And that's the progress I made on all my drafts. Next, I want to talk about how many words I wrote this year. And this year in total, I wrote 287,016 words. That's a lot. That is a lot. And I was a little bit curious, so I broke that down to how many words per day in the entire year. And that's 786 words per day that I wrote. Now, was I writing every single day? No. I took breaks in between each draft. And then also when I was moving, I took a lot of days off and time off because of the move. So I wasn't writing every single day, but 786 words per day on average is still a lot, especially because sometimes, especially when I had a job, I was only writing like 200 or 300 words a day sometimes. And so I think 786 is amazing. It's a lot of words. I never thought that I would be writing this much in a year, but I'm glad I have. I've made a lot of progress, and it's just really exciting to kind of tally up all the work you do, because I see my word counts on a daily basis, and it can be like 300, 400. Sometimes it's 1,000, 2,000. I think one of my biggest days this year was like a 5,000 word day, but those are a little bit more rare. And it's just nice to see the cumulative effect of all that work and just to be really proud of that. This next one might be a little controversial, it might be shocking, but the other big accomplishment I had this year was I finally came up with a title for Project Lily. Project Lily is the working title that I use on YouTube and social media, but it is not the real title of my book. I will share that at some point when I deem it appropriate, but just not right now. And a fun fact about the title of this book is it hasn't had a title in a year and a half. I've been working on it for a year and a half and had not picked a title until recently. When I started working on this book a year and a half ago, I was thinking through potential titles for my novel, and nothing really stood out to me, and I was having a really difficult time coming up with a title. And I had an idea, and I ended up going with that idea, but I was never happy with it. And I just kind of used this little title as a placeholder until I could think of a real title. And it's actually still, this little placeholder title is still what all my drafts are under in my computer. And every time I see it, I cringe because I don't like it. But I just said, okay, I'll work on writing the book, and I'm sure it will come to me as I go through and get more involved in the story. And a year and a half later, it still hadn't come to me, and it was really, really starting to bother me because I was like, I've got to come up with a title for this book. And I was getting really frustrated over this, and it was kind of consuming my thoughts about what to title it. 2 months ago, I finally came up with the name for my novel. It was really an amazing experience because I hadn't expected it at the time. And it's one of those things where I feel like life just nudges you in a certain direction and you get really excited about it, and then you just know. And that's the experience I had. At the time that this happened, I was going through some plotting for my novel in draft 3. I had been probably 25 to 35% of the way through, and I was trying to work out a plot sequence because there was like a little bit of a hole, and I was trying to work it out. And I just was sitting here thinking, and I was just like, how do I fix this? What can happen? Blah, blah, blah. I was going through the whole thing. And then as I was thinking about it, this phrase popped in my head. And then I was just like, oh my God, that's the title of my book. It just hit me. and then it immediately felt right. And I was so excited about it. Like, I love the title of my book. And it's just, I don't want to give anything away about it, but I was so excited about it. And I was like, it's perfect. I love it. This is the title of my book for sure. And then it has just been this little happy part of my book ever since. I love it. And I'm so excited about it. And this was just, it was such a relief to have a title, because for a while I was like, I wonder if I'm ever going to come up with one. And I did. And I'm so happy about it. And I love it. And that was honestly one of the biggest accomplishments for me this year. And I know it's not a huge accomplishment compared to writing 3 drafts and writing 287,000 words. Coming up with a title sounds quite insignificant, but to me it was like this thing that had just been bothering me for so long, and it became this monumental like elephant in the room. And now that's done, and I'm happy I have a title and I can finally not worry about it. And the last thing, the last accomplishment for writing this year is I started working on a new book. I'm also very excited about this. I had not really planned when I would work on a new book or what that new book would be. When I was in between drafts 2 and 3, I always take a break in between drafts. So I said to myself, well, what am I going to do in the meantime? And I thought it would be the perfect opportunity to start working on a new book, because as I start moving into further drafts of, draft 4, 5, 6, whatever, I'm going to start hitting more breaks, in between drafts. And then also I'm going to start hitting the point where I send it out to beta readers and I send it out to editors or for querying. And there's going to be times where I am not going to be working on Project Lily. So what am I going to do in the meantime? As these more frequent breaks are quickly approaching, I thought it would be the perfect time to start working on a new novel. That way I could work on a new book while I'm letting Project Lily do its thing. I sat down and worked on potential book ideas. I have had other book ideas floating around in my head and on my brainstorm list, and I took this opportunity to evaluate those and bring in some new ideas. And I ended up picking an idea I really like. I think it's really interesting. It'll be fun to write. And I even plotted and outlined a really rough version of a novel for this idea. It's nowhere near ready to write. It does need a lot more brainstorming, world building, plotting, character stuff, but at least I've got it started. And it was just really nice to have that in motion. And it's just nice to have something to pick up and work on whenever I need to take a break from Project Lily. And these were the biggest accomplishments I have made this year and all the progress I've made on my writing. 2025 has been a spectacular year for me in terms of writing, and I'm really happy with everything that I've done and how much progress I've made. And I can't wait to see what I do next year.